What are possible worlds? In philosophical contexts, it can be really easy to phrase your ideas in terms of possible worlds. But if I want to do that, I better make it really clear what possible worlds are. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Also, God exists, and we're going to see an argument for that, but after the possible world stuff. The simple explanation of a possible world is that it's a complete description of a way reality could have been. But simple explanations make philosophers mad, so let's be more precise. To explain what a possible world is, you need to know what a proposition is. Here are two sentences, snow is white and la neige est blanche. These sentences obviously use different words, but the meaning of the sentences are the same. This meaning behind the statements is the proposition that they convey. And you know how in algebra people use letters to refer to numbers? Well, people do that with propositions a lot too. For example, R could be the proposition that it is raining, D could be the proposition that dogs have 4 legs, and so on. Propositions, by their very nature, can be either true or false. This is their truth value. We can also distinguish between contingent and necessary propositions. Contingent propositions are propositions which could have had a different truth value to what they actually do have. If it's true, it could have been false, and vice versa. But a necessary proposition must have the truth value it has. If it's true, then it cannot have been false. For example, potatoes exist is a contingent proposition since it could have been false. Potatoes didn't need to exist. Also, France has a king is not true, but it could have been true, so it's a contingent proposition. 2 + 2 = 4 and cats are cats, on the other hand, must be true, so they're necessary propositions. Now, let's make a big table, an infinitely big table. On the top, we'll write out absolutely every proposition there is, all of them, every last single one going on forever. Our goal is to fill out every box on the table with trues and falses. If a proposition on the top is necessarily true, then every box below it gets a true in it. If a proposition is necessarily false, then it gets a false in absolutely every box below it. Now the rest of the propositions on our table are contingent ones. Our goal now is to fill out every row with a different combination of trues and falses. Maybe on the first row we could write false, true, etc. Next we could go true, true, false, false, etc. And so on. We fill out our infinitely long table so that absolutely every combination of trues and falses appears on some row. Now, possible worlds simply are the rows of this table. What does all of that mean? Well, that means that a possible world, say where I'm the king of France, the moon is colonized, and turtle corns exist, corresponds to a row on our table where all the relevant propositions are true. Now, there's one last complication. Say that R is the proposition that Alice is taller than Bob, and S is the proposition that Bob is taller than Alice. Now, we could have either one of these propositions be true, but we can't have both of these propositions be true at the same time. So if we have any row of our table with inconsistencies like that, they need to be removed from our table. There, with that caveat out of the way, we have completely defined possible worlds. So let's use our new understanding of what possible worlds are to analyze statements made about them. What does it mean to say that P is true in some possible world? It just means that P could be true, and if P was true, it wouldn't create any sort of inconsistencies. What does it mean to say that Q is true in all possible worlds? It means that Q must be true. Q is a necessarily true proposition. In all possible worlds where X is true, Y is also true. This means that necessarily the truth of X implies the truth of Y. Now, a way of visualizing possible worlds is by imagining them as a collection of infinity floating orbs. You could either picture them as containing inside of them what's going on in that possible world, or if you prefer more abstract thinking, you could picture them as containing the propositions true in that possible world. So we could visualize the statement in all possible worlds where X is true, Y is also true, by grouping together all the possible worlds that have X being true in them and recognizing that Y is also true in them. Now that we have a handle on possible worlds, we can go into an argument for God's existence called the Gale-Pruss Cosmological Argument. Theists typically try to argue that contingent reality is best explained by a necessary being, namely God. The primary objection to this is that maybe contingent reality just exists without any sort of explanation. Such an answer explicitly rejects the principle of sufficient reason, or the PSR. This is the principle that, for every true contingent proposition, there's another true proposition which explains its truth. Maybe the objector is fine with denying the PSR. Some things are just completely unexplained. But what about the weak PSR? This is the principle that for every true contingent proposition, there is a possible world where that proposition is explained by some proposition true in that world. For example, the universe exists is a true contingent proposition in the actual world. Maybe there's an explanation, maybe there isn't. But according to the weak PSR, there is some possible world where the universe exists, and there's an explanation for the universe's existence in that world. This is called the weak PSR because it isn't making as strong of a claim as the regular PSR, so it should be even harder to reject. But the thing is, this principle is all we need. I'll show you. The actual world is the possible world which we all live in. Now let's take all the propositions that are contingently true in the actual world and put them in a long line, and put n's in between them. This makes one really big proposition, we'll call it C, which is also contingent and true in the actual world. Now the weak PSR tells us that for some contingent true proposition, there is a possible world where this proposition is explained. So there is another possible world where C is true, and there's a proposition true in that world, E, which explains the truth of C. Now, in that possible world, is E necessarily true or contingently true? Well, let's suppose that E is contingently true. That means that not E, the proposition that E is false, is also a contingent proposition. Now here in the actual world, either E is contingently true or not E is contingently true. And all the contingently true propositions in the actual world go into C, so C includes either E or not E. But there's a consistent possible world which has both C and E in it. This would be inconsistent if C included not E. So C must contain E rather than not E. But since C is true in the actual world, then E, which is contained within C, is also true in the actual world. So whatever explanation of contingent reality there is in that other possible world is also over here in the actual world. This was all proven under the assumption that E was contingently true though. If E is necessarily true on the other hand, then E is automatically true in every possible world, including the actual world. So there's no getting around it. The weak PSR shows that the whole of contingent reality, C, has an explanation. All that's left is to find out what that explanation is. I think it's God, but I'm not going to argue for that in this video. Instead, I'll just leave you to mull over what an explanation of all contingent reality would look like. That's the end of this video. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe if you enjoy this content.